All right, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast. It is June, middle of June, and we are going over an exciting tournament for PGA. It is the U.S. Open. I'm here as usual with my guys Colin and Pete. Guys, what's going on? You excited for the U.S. Open?
I'm super happy to make another millionaire, again this year. We're 1 for 1. Got to keep the hitting streak going. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure it's another fantasy club.
Knocking on some wood over here. We're starting to push the jinx pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, when you make millionaires, you can push the jinx all you want to.
Yeah, when you're hitting 100%, it's pretty easy to keep going with it.
Yeah, that's a sustainable run good for sure.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to get into as much U.S. Open as possible. We usually do the show. We start off by looking back at the last week. We're not going to do that this week just because it's Open. I mean, it's one of the biggest tournaments, biggest weeks for PGA DFS. We want to get quickly into that as possible. There's no Euro this week because of the majors, so we're going to jump right into it. Some quick notes about other content. We've got a lot of good content on the site already. And then a big sort of item is that we're going to have a live podcast or a live show on Wednesday night. It's going to be us three as well as Sean, who works at FantasyLabs with us and writes some good columns for us as well. He's going to join us. It's going to be us for Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So please come join us. We will send out the links. We'll have it up on the site where you can RSVP and you can do all that, and it'll remind you. But 9:30 Eastern time on Wednesday night, come join us. We'll talk about line movement. We'll talk about weather. We'll talk about all the stuff that you need to set your lineups before Thursday lock. Please join us. All right, let's jump into U.S. Open. And I think it's probably just a good place to start, Colin. Oakmont Country Club. What in the world do we do with this? So the U.S. Open is unique, and the Masters has been there since 1934 at Augusta. National U.S. Open rotates courses. So U.S. Open played at Oakmont in 2007, has not played since then, rotates every year. Colin, what in the world do we do?
Well, this is kind of one of the more frustrating weeks for me because, honestly, there's not a whole lot you can do from a course fit and a course history perspective. One of the things I was curious on this weekend is what would happen just if we tried to fit a round peg into a square hole and we just went back and turned all of the U.S. Open courses into just like we're going to lump them all into U.S. Open course and treat them all the same. And there's some theoretical basis for that because every year they try to make it tougher by generally favoring ball strikers, or so they say, and kind of toughen up the edges of the fairway. So I asked, okay, can we just kind of treat it as they're all trying to do the same thing? And the short answer is no. The predictions ended up coming out worse, both in terms of course fit and course history. It's kind of every course is its own individual animal. And I think you really have to rely on kind of knowing what the course is and how it plays. So from a data perspective, this is one of the few times that I am running completely blind and basically at the mercy of what Pete thinks the course is and how it will play. So Pete, please save me from myself and cure my blind spots.
Well, I'm stoked about this week. My model currently is plus minus 4.4 points, and basically I'm doing our standard, a lot of green in regulation, a little lower on adjusted round, long-term adjusted round, but I still have it at 18 points, and then I put in scrambling and driving accuracy, which I think is the key here. Basically, you have to stay in the fairway off the tee is the most critical aspect. The rough is just insanely long, and when you get in the rough or some of these bunkers, fairway bunkers, you're just going to have no shot at the green. So from what I understand and just from reading a lot and looking at people talking about the course, or hearing people talk about the course, they say driving accuracy is absolutely critical and greens and regulation is absolutely critical. So I think that makes sense to me given the course and everything you hear about it. It's relatively short, but it's still going to be extremely difficult because the rough and the penalties of not being accurate are so high. And then a big thing that everyone's talking about is just bogey avoidance and scrambling because it is such a tough course and finding the guys who are going to do well in that category. So I'm pretty excited with what my model is spitting out. And I think that, we're going to have to, look at guys who are accurate. One other thing that, Colin, you generally like, and it happens a decent bit, is putting should be devalued just a little bit because the greens are that absurd. I posted something on my Twitter where a guy nudged the ball maybe 3 inches and it rolled, 40, 50 feet, maybe more. And it wasn't like it just got going and kept going. It trickled 50 feet. So the greens are insane. The rough is insane. There's other Twitter videos and things that I've seen where, club pros are trying to hit approach shots or hitting shots around the green from the rough. And one of the guys tried to hit a shot from the rough, maybe 20 yards from the flag, just completely missed it. And this is a PGA pro. So it's a ridiculous course. I wouldn't be surprised to see +1, even par, somewhere around that, win the tournament. I've heard people say even as high as +5. So it's tricky. There's not many birdies, and the finishing score is going to be a high percentage of the points. So it's kind of a long-winded answer, but it definitely is unique, and I think there's certain things we can look at a lot.
No, that definitely fills in a lot of the gaps that I was wondering about. And I do have one more for you. So my understanding of the U.S. Open is that's generally how they try to make it every year. Would you say that's kind of a consistent philosophy, toughen up the rough and reward driving accuracy in this tournament, even though it's at different courses?
Yep. They're always trying to make it really difficult. If you look at the history of the U.S. Open, the scores are always much, much higher.
Right. So my question is, how do they make it difficult? You can make it long. You could make it tougher in the rough. You could make insane bunkers. Do they always try to make it, do they always try to penalize accuracy?
Yeah. They do that. And they always, they try to find the toughest courses. And, this course, if you just look at the yardage and all that stuff, there's one hole that's a par 3 that'll play close to 300 yards, which is just absolutely insane. But other than that, it doesn't look that intimidating, but what they do is they just make the rough impossible and they make the greens impossible.
Okay. So, and you'd say they do that pretty much every year at the U.S. Open?
A lot of times. That's what they'll do most of the time in general. Definitely they put a premium on accuracy for sure.
Okay, so here's then my course fit hot take then, and I'm wondering how this plays out. So just for to see what was going on, I did do kind of an individual year course fit by course fit and see what stats did do well every single year. And by and large, the driving accuracy thing is kind of overall, it's a myth. The last 3 years, driving accuracy was slightly penalized according to course fit stats, which is just, I don't know, I can see maybe that being true in Chambers Bay, maybe a links course is a lot more wide open. That's kind of my rudimentary knowledge of how course layout works. But the 2 times that the 2 years where distance was at a super premium and accuracy was a super penalty are these 2 years, 2009 and 2011. And both of those years, it rained on the course. And we are forecast for rain this time, Thursday and Friday around. I'm debating the idea of as a contrarian kind of, here's kind of the secret course fit that's going on. There is a path for me to taking bombers, especially if everybody's going to be picking ball strikers. So from a game theory perspective and kind of a hidden edge, I'm floating the idea. I was just wondering what you thought.
But the bomb, if you're going to take bombers, you still can't have guys who are not accurate, right? So you would want bombers who are also at least decently accurate?
In theory, yes, but this is kind of one of my articles to be. Distance and accuracy are frequently negatively correlated. So if you had to choose between the two, which you often will, there's a hidden weather angle to taking bombers from a contrarian side. So again, that's my hot take for this week. I'm wondering okay, where am I wrong? Where did you guys shoot that one down?
Well, I know one guy that you're going to love, and that's Jimmy Holmes. I'm sure you want to just load up.
Every week. That's
this is the week to do it because his price is just insane. And other people have touted him. I think that's a really hot take for this tournament. Obviously you want guys who can hit far still. There's still an advantage to that. Some of these long par 4s, long par 3s, there's a nice aspect to that. But everything I've read and heard, it's all about putting in the fairway here. And
yeah, I believe that in theory, but it's would you say the same? Would a rainy course change your opinion on the type of guys that you want?
It makes it harder. It puts more of a premium on distance because if it's rainier, the sprays that might bounce out, into the thick rough might stick, and obviously the ball's not going to roll as far. So, the guys who aren't as long that generally are more accurate, that does hurt them. So, yeah, it's certainly something to consider. It's a tricky week, though, for sure. And I think looking at all the U.S. Opens as one thing is definitely going to create a lot of noise, and it's going to be hard to kind of figure out a course fit because, like you said, Chambers Bay last year was set up totally different. They were actually getting birdies and stuff like that. It wasn't a traditional scoring for a U.S. Open. So there's other courses that have been like that, and then there's courses like this, and they do a lot of different things. But the general goal of the U.S. Open is for it to be one of the harder courses to score on.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And like to be honest, I kind of wish I had answered this question more full of in general, does rain promote bombers? And like it does like a wet course almost play as like a trump card for bombers overall, like once the course gets wet. I think that's conceivable, especially if stuff doesn't roll as much and like you just need to get out of wet grass. I really should answer that question down the road, but like in the limited kind of like, all right, let's take a look at individual US Opens. The jump from bombers on wet courses is just high enough that I'm like, I play so little GPPs that I think I'm going to have no problem like firing up, just going all bombers this week is kind of like a built-in contrarian type of thing.
Right. And if you look, I mean, most recently, Spieth -5, Keimer won at -9. Before that was +1, which is generally where they want to go. Rory won with a 16 under at Congressional, which is a great historic course in the U.S., but obviously not of the same caliber. Pebble Beach played even when Graham McDowell won. I mean, you look through Oakmont, last time it was played, +5 won. So it's hard to look back in 2007, but yeah, that's just the kind of gist of it. I mean, you go back to some of Tiger Woods' dominant years. I think when he won in 2000 at -12, I think he won by just a massive margin. I'd have to go back and look, but in general, they're striving to have it play even. That's the goal of the U.S. Open.
Yep.
So speaking of the 2007 tournament, it's the most recent one we have at Oakmont. How much stock do we put into that data, Colin?
Between somewhere 0 and 1, I'd put it, I mean, on the lighter side. My wrapped up series in course history and course fit this week says a 5-year window is probably the best. I mean, just it in general works better for course fit. How much has Oakmont changed since 2007? I don't really know. It definitely played as a pro accuracy course when it was there, which is consistent with how people like generally view it now. But then I have this conflicting rain thing that says like maybe it favors bombers. So I think all else being equal, I would be fine just weighting it as 0.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Speaking of just how difficult the course is, and Pete, you mentioned, previous years, they're trying to get it to play even. +5 was in 2007. So the point is birdies are going to be hard to come by, which is a little bit different than the past weeks. And really just all of this year, we've been playing PGA DFS. So the question that I've had trouble dealing with, and I've seen floated around, is if birdies are discounted, as in they're hard to come by, does that mean that you should put less weight into getting birdies, or does that make the guys who get birdies at an elite rate even more valuable? Which way does it go?
Yeah, I think that's the defining question of the U.S. Open. What does the fact that it's essentially the worst scoring environment that they'll play in all year, how does that change your approach from what you'd normally pick? I kind of ran my initial set, and just the order, like the rank order essentially of who you'd pick, and with that low scoring environment built in, doesn't change a whole lot. It's almost like your range of outcomes is more compressed. So maybe like the only thing I could see conceivable is maybe the really top guys have a little bit less of an advantage just because the gap from birdie to par is not as big from par to bogey. So I'm really struggling to find anything definitively different. That's a smoking gun. That's totally the way you change it up. So I don't think you get in too much trouble if you don't change your general approach.
Pete, what are your thoughts on that? You striving for birdies this week, or you just sort of ignoring it?
I think the biggest leak in my overall DFS golf game has just not been hunting birdies in general. I mean, I am hunting birdies, and I've been I look at the weighted averages every week, but from what I can tell, just looking at the guys who I think are putting out the best lineups week in, week out, there's a huge premium on just finding birdie guys. Problem is, this course, there's not going to be nearly as many birdies. It's going to be a lot harder to string them together, where like the 3 birdie streaks have a lot of equity other weeks. And then in addition to that, because there's less scoring, and because we expect it to be pretty high scoring overall, where even par is going to be a premium, such a high percentage of the golfers' overall points are going to come from their finishing score. So then it's like, okay, I just need to target the guys who are going to do the best. And generally the guys who do the best are the guys who make the most birdies. So it's kind of a weird thing to think about. But I'm not going to put as much of a premium as I will some other weeks. Upcoming, I'm really just going to strive. There's a coin flip in my mind of guys, and one guy might be a little more risky, but he makes a lot more birdies in general. I'm going to start taking the guy who makes a lot more birdies because of the way DraftKings scores.
Yeah, it's a cyclical thought process that you can get trapped in sometimes. Difficult to navigate this week. So so in a contest like the Millie Maker, and Pete and I did an evergreen pod on this last night, and it was out today. So go listen to that. It's all about strategy for the Millie Maker. So in a Millie Maker contest where it's so top heavy, you're going to have top 10 guys in your lineup. So the question is how do you measure upside in a tournament like the U.S. Open? We have upside as a stat. We have, birdies, but in a tournament where like no one really has upside, is this something that you should just discount, or maybe you just take consistent guys and those are the guys that are more likely to get a top 10? I'm having trouble figuring out whether I want to have high upside golfers or just really go for the consistent guys. Colin, what do you think?
I think the reason you still target upside, and we talked about this briefly before, is the lower the scoring or the worse the scoring environment, the higher premium on finishing points. So like 20 finishing points for like a second guy is worth way more in like when birdies are hard to come by, because like they're going to be worth proportionally more. So I think upside still pays out at like a tournament where +5 is the winner. It just manifests itself in different ways. I think upside is upside. And if you can measure, I feel like upside will in theory pay off over the long term as much as an easy course as it does in a hard course. It's just because it's a measure of who can play elite golf. That's my interpretation of upside. And I think that, I would have to see something pretty definitive that says it would be different on easy than hard courses. So still all upside guys. That's the way I'd approach it.
Okay. So speaking of upside, we wanted to definitely touch on this before we get into our player evaluation as we normally do. And it's the Vegas lines. We're going to touch on these in our live show, but we do have really important Vegas lines. Majors, we obviously have a lot of money coming into these bets and on these guys. So I think it's really important to monitor the lines of these guys from where they opened to where they were even just recently to where they are now. Pete, you and I talked about this and, sort of how you measure the line movement and putting more weight into maybe recent weeks. But then you have a guy like Daniel Berger who really didn't see any line movement and then all of a sudden jumped quite a bit after his win at the St. Jude Classic. So, what's sticking out to you so far? And is it for a situation like Berger, do you just sort of discount that?
Discount it. It's still a night, a really incredible line move, but you know exactly why the line moves. So just a matter of how much do you weight, recent performance and one recent performance. The one thing just from the eye test from watching the tournament, he drove the ball incredibly last week. Normally a guy who likes to fade the ball a lot, he's even putting his draws in perfect position. So I was impressed with his accuracy, and even Jason Day. I listened to JJ Reddick's podcast today with Jason Day, and he talked about how it's important to always be putting yourself in a situation where you would be uncomfortable in golf, and that's really whenever you're uncomfortable in golf, it's normally in a situation where A, you're trying to make the cut and trying to stay on the tour, B, you're an elite guy or borderline getting there, and you're competing and you're contending. And Berger was obviously in that spot, and I know this is really subjective and all that stuff, but everyone was talking about how just focused he was. He looked really, really good in that moment. So I think that there's a little bit of equity seeing that he closed the door to get his first win. He was the Rookie of the Year on tour last year, so there's a lot of reasons to believe he could be getting a lot better. A lot of guys with Berger in particular talk about how he comes from a tennis background, and his dad's obviously a famous guy in tennis, and he was a tennis guy first, now he's in golf. So I think there's a reason to buy Berger right now. He's a young guy, and I think we could see this trajectory continue. So that's why it's priced in. And obviously there's a huge recency bias with guys who just won. So, Colin, I'm sure I just put a lot of stuff out there that you think is nonsense, but what are your thoughts?
No, it's not all nonsense, not even 20% of it. I think that I believe in the eye test. I believe that all that stuff is kind of assessing how they do this week. In terms of line movement, I would honestly just start the clock in terms of where you measure movement, starting maybe Tuesday or Wednesday night.
That's fair.
Yeah, because anything.
This week?
Yeah, this week. So basically, you start the clock either like tonight or tomorrow, and then see what moves before the tournament starts. Because that's the easiest way to filter out. Well, yeah, his odds are going up because it reflects the fact that he won a tournament. He is better than we thought before the tournament started. That's just incorporating new information. So in theory, you should be incorporating all of that new information in your models anyway. So the line movement type stuff is, what did I miss in the model in theory? That's the way that I use line movement. Like, what did I miss? Like, kind of fill in those gaps. So I think that's the best way. And we'll talk about, we really should talk more about line movement in terms of like over the course of the week in different spots in the weeks, because I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it makes a difference as far as when you see the line movement, like Pete said. Also, keep in mind, the majors are different, and that will affect pricing too, because lines come out, 2 weeks before tee-offs happens for this one. Mm-hmm. So Berger's price is pre-St. Jude Classic. So we'll get into it when we get picks and stuff, but his price does not reflect his win. He is probably one of the best values on the board, but I assume he'll also be super popular because everyone's reasonably clued into that information.
Okay. And that sort of gets into the last question I have for Vegas, because and we'll hit on this as we get into our players, because there are especially some top guys who have seen some significant line movement in the last week or so. So we'll get into that. But my general question is, does line movement matter more for the top guys than the bottom guys, or does it matter equally for everyone?
That is a great question, and it's one that I wish I had a better answer to. I think with the top guys, you'll see more absolute changes because, when you start from 10% to win, a 1% change means you're 11%, whereas a 1% change when you start at 1% is huge. So there's some sort of probably optimal solve for points over expectation as a function of your starting odds and your closing odds. It's a long way of saying I don't know how it matters differently. I suspect yes, it does though.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into our player analysis. We will take questions. If you guys want to tweet at us, we'll send information on how to do that, how to send in questions for our live show. We'll have more questions to answer about strategy and stuff for the Wednesday live show at 9:30 Eastern time again. But let's get into our player analysis. We're going to actually divide it up into 4 categories this week. We did this for the Masters just because I think it makes sense for a major to do it this way, and we'll do it again. So we're going to start and do the value guys, which is going to be guys that are 6'9", $6,900 on DraftKings and lower. Then we'll do 7 to 8'4", 8'5 to 9'9", and then the elite guys 10K or higher. I'll introduce those again. But we'll start at the low tier, 6'9" and lower, and we'll go over those first. Who is starting this week?
I think that's me this time. So who am I liking in the sub 7K range? It's a lot of familiar names actually. Brennan Steele's there, as he always seems to be a value pick. Mm-hmm. I think you can almost time he's like clockwork at this point, where it's scorching first 2 rounds, falls off the map in the 3rd and 4th. At least he does it after he makes the cut. I don't know if that's reliable or not, but I think that is a thing. Harris English is also here, kind of unsurprisingly, given that his pretty decent St. Jude performance is not priced in prior. And then Charlie Hoffman, who is playing just overall really well right now. 6,700 is pretty shockingly cheap considering look what is his most recent results. He won Texas not that long ago, 2 other top 15 finishes. 6,700 is pretty cheap, all things considered. That may be a course fit that I'm not necessarily pricing in. Maybe prices reflect course fit better than pure data can't, but I definitely am liking those guys. Other intriguing, if you want, there are a couple almost Euro names that are popping up as far as contrarian. Chris Wood and Bernd Wiesberger, who have just put up a series of good results over on the Euro Tour. If you're thinking there's going to be casual money in here and kind of going off name unrecognition, those are probably your best pure bets from no one has heard of these them standpoint. Those are my favorite guys in the value bin. Pete, who you got so far?
You're saving Grillo for Pete. I can feel it. Pete's on mute right now, but he's going to turn his volume up.
Grillo's number one. I'm a donkey.
I mean, I got to give him to you sometime. I can't take him every week.
I'm all over. He's fourth in my model overall. I absolutely love it.
Overall, wow.
Scorching hot. Everyone else at the top is pretty much a stud, but I absolutely love him this week. He hits a lot of greens. He has not terrible driving distance either. So I just think he's a great play this week in that price range. There's a couple other guys I think are intriguing. There's no one that I'm just in love with. Rafael Cabrera-Bello. He's another guy that hits a lot of greens that's ranking relatively well because I have greens regulation priced up. Outside of that, it's a lot of flyers. Like Danny Lee, I don't hate. Charlie Hoffman, that Colin brought up, I don't hate that either. But my favorite plays in general for cheaper guys are in the low sevens. So I don't have too many guys here with the way, if you want to play a day Dustin Johnson lineup or something like that, certainly can get behind taking a couple guys in this range for sure, and you're going to have to. But in general, I think I'll be taking a lot of guys in the low 7K range versus under 7,000.
Interesting. Two guys that I want to ask you about before we move on. One guy is the guy who has the best adjusted round score long term in this grouping, which is Kevin Na, and then maybe a contrarian guy. Going off what you said, Colin. Maybe if you're going to take distance guys, is a guy who we've seen priced up at other tournaments. It's down here as a distance guy. We know Finau. I mean, if you're going to go this contrarian play, I mean, no, maybe
I can't. I have no chance on Finau for me.
Why not?
I mean, for tournaments, I don't hate it, but
yeah.
All right. Look, I mean, you can have the driving distance angle. I'm gonna value accuracy, and he sprays it way too much for me. I have to look a little bit more at how well he's been scrambling recently, but at least in my initial stuff, he's not a guy that is even on my radar.
No, I get that, and that depends on how much am I going to play this whole distance in the rain angle. I don't hate either of those. Watch
me have Finau on a winning team now. I'll be convinced come Thursday that he's a good play. But as of right now, with how I'm looking at it, and I'll have to consider the rain a little bit more in a couple days here. But as of now, he's just not accurate enough for me.
Okay. But no, both of those plays, Tony Finau and Kevin Na, for kind of depending on which angle, they're kind of mirror opposites of those I would buy both of those. That's conceivable.
So if it's raining hard, Finau is your guy, Colin.
I think I'm leaning that way. Yeah, it's enough of a bump, and I just feel like it's mostly a contrarian type of thing. I don't know that I'd commit to my rain angle in cash, but.
Sure. Of course, yeah.
We should talk about Lucas Glover, a guy we tout quite often here on this pod. If you want to take the angle that putting doesn't matter at all or that it's really discounted, that's your guy right there. Talk about a guy who puts in the fairway, has enough distance, and has great irons. That's a play that I wouldn't be surprised to see do well. I've heard a couple other people talk about him, but this is a guy who hits a ton of greens. And he, he's solid in both accuracy and driving distance. So that's another guy I guess I should bring up. Is he popping it all for you, Colin? Yeah,
he is right there in kind of that upper tier, the top of the value bin. It's just it might be age-old debate. What do you do with him and Keegan Bradley? Putting maybe not matter at this point, but what if you truly cannot putt?
That's what it's gonna be. And when you're watching, are you gonna watch any of this, Colin, at all?
Probably, yeah. It's the major. I gotta watch some of it. Yeah.
I guarantee all of us will have a golfer that'll have a 4.5-foot par putt that you'll be so nervous and then they'll just miss. There's gonna be tons of those situations. So you roster Glover and he just starts bricking putt after putt. You only have yourself to blame.
Yep.
Colin, you had mentioned, I'm not sure if this was in last week's pod or a couple weeks ago, you had brought the hypothetical situation of theoretically if all these guys were putting on ice, what does it matter? And Pete's video that he posted on his Twitter where that guy just barely touched, that's what it was. The guy was putting on ice. It just moved. Yeah, it went 60 yards and he barely tapped it. So your hypothetical situation that you're wondering about, you get to watch it this week.
Oh, good. So, but I think there kind of is something to that angle. They're putting on a glacier this time.
People have said that this is going to be the hardest greens they've ever had to play, some of the players. So, pay for what it's worth.
Hardest, wow. Okay. All right, let's move on to our next tier. So this one is going to be 7K to 8.4. I sort of just divided it up. This is an arbitrary cutoff. I just did it to put the players in sort of half and half bins so we could talk about as many as we could. So 7K to 8.4. Pete, who's standing out in that range?
Oh, man, we got just so many guys who are just absolutely crushing the model in this range. I think my favorite play overall is Charles Schwartzel. I think he's just way too cheap for the caliber of golfer that he is. He does everything relatively well. If you believe in the eye test at all, is one of the top 3 or 4 swings on tour. I just have no idea why he's 7,500. I think he's just a great play. I'll leave some for Colin. I love Kevin Chappell again. We just saw him be 9,700. He's 7,100 now. I think he's a great play. Love Matthew Fitzpatrick, who just won on the Euro Tour. Very accurate guy. Hits a ton of greens. I think he's a tremendous course fit. Someone I always like every week is Russell Knox. I'll be on Russell Knox again here. He's a nice value. Martin Keimer's won here before. He's a value I've heard people talk about. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's just so many guys in this 7,000 to 77, 7,800. I'll leave some more guys for Colin, but I'm pretty bullish on this range.
Well, obviously, I mean, did you really leave JB Holmes for me?
Of course,
I did actually take him in the front. So, obviously, I mean, he shows up for me week after week. I'm always wondering, is this a mistake? I think he just really is, he feels like a boom or bust in the scheme of things. Maybe not as extreme as a Finau or something, but I think when he's on, he's just really on.
He's a top 10 machine when he's on. It's just ridiculous. And he's been touted a good bit, actually. So
yeah, so he's definitely a great GPP flyer. The ones that are kind of maybe obviously popping in this range are both Daniel Berger and Brooks Koepka, because their St. Jude results are not priced in. They did really well. Therefore, they are great values in this range. There's no mystery to it. The only question there is, what is their ownership going to be? And is it enough to sway you off of them? Because it's just – you never get non-priced in results at the majors. And I don't know what the best way to exploit that is during a majors week. Is it worth it to do it in a millionaire maker with dumb money? Do we actually know, are amateur players going to be playing these cash games too, more than the usual, or are they all just trying to win $1 million?
It's a mixture. You definitely, there's just more volume across the board. So I think the new players are spreading their dollars around, but I think in general, they're a higher allocation is definitely going to the millionaire maker.
Yeah. So, but the cash game, do you think it might be a little bit softer still?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Then Koepka, if you just don't consider ownership, then I think Koepka and Berger are just kind of.
Koepka's an excellent play if you're going to take the driving distance angle, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
So, do you think that Koepka is going to have the same sort of ownership bump that Berger? Because it almost feels like the first place guy gets the ownership bump, whereas guys who are in the top 10 but play really well, just miss winning, don't get the ownership bump but still sort of get the data bump?
That is a good question, and I wish I had studied ownership percentages more to say definitively yes or no. I would believe that in terms of just the guy that who won last week, and okay, I'll pick him. Maybe especially this week too, because he's so much cheaper. I can get last week's winner for 7,200. Yeah. So I feel like Berger, if you had to fade on ownership of the two, definitely Berger over Koepka for the fade.
Okay. One guy that I want to ask you guys about, especially for going the greens and regulation, and putting's not important at all here. Paul Casey at 7,900. Any interesting at all to you guys?
He's interesting. He's polarized. I've heard some people say he's a great player. I've heard some people say they're going to completely fade him. I generally am a Paul Casey fan, but I don't know. I think I'll have more guys in the lower 7K range. One other guy that's I've heard people talk about that I will 100% fade, and if he burns me, is Jim Furyk. But we'll see. We'll see what happens there.
I have no problem with fades on both of those. Just if you wait recent, then Paul Casey's recent just isn't that great. In his last, outside of a fourth at the Masters, which is nothing to sneeze at, given it's 2 missed cuts to 23 or 41, it's not top 20 material.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Before you even ask, are you a Kuchar supporter or not, Colin?
Well, he's in the next tier, right?
Yeah. He's going to be the most owned player in this tournament, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, which is kind of sad because like back in the day, I was the biggest like Kuchar and Furyk fan in terms of like just the consistent machines and all that. Are we getting into this new tier? Should we just go
Yeah,
on?
yeah, let's bump up to it. Yeah, start it off for us.
Okay, so where's our cutoff? 85 to like
to 8-9. No, I'm sorry. To 9-9, and then we'll do the 10K guys after.
Okay. Okay. Who do we have?
Kuchar's not popping the most for you. I'm gonna be shocked. There's one other guy that popping a lot for me too.
Hang on, I gotta set my filters here. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely up there. I mean, I'm just shocked to see him like ever like below 9,000. Essentially, I agree. Like it's kind of I would never hate that as a value play in the slightest. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, just number one, value overall, everything with a bullet. Like, yes, just like it also helps. Like, it's a kind of a narrow range, but like, yes, he is the no-brainer. In terms of other, just like who even remotely competes on value, I think the only value competition here is maybe like Brandon Grace, who is kind of somebody. He's just a very like consistent at a top 20 level. His results definitely have. I mean, there's like a win at ninth, like a disappointing in Sawgrass, but like he's been slightly off the radar recently, so people might forget about him. So he'd be only my other conceivable like decent value in that range. Cash games, I'm actually like Bubba Watson is actually like if you look at like he has a surprisingly good floor, I think in general. Like I get course fit I'm really not playing the course fit type of thing, but just he is surprisingly more consistent than you might think in terms of just like cash game reliability. Now, whether or not that can get obliterated in course fit, like I feel like you have some opinions there.
Yeah, I'm not on Bubba. Bubba's one of those guys, and again, this is really subjective, but I've heard other people talk about it. I'm of this mindset. When Bubba has it going and it's a place he's comfortable, he does really well. When he has strong course history, Bubba almost always performs. I've done a little bit of back testing on that. He just crushes. But when things go bad and he faces adversity, I've seen him mail it in and just have like the worst attitude out there. And, this is totally kind of speculation here, but the players voted him like, a couple of years ago as like the least likable guy on tour. He talked shit to his caddy. I mean, it's just one of those things where things aren't going well. He can really kind of, mail it in. You talked about how he's consistent. I think that's a lot to do with talent, and I think a lot of courses he can get himself back in because he's capable of making birdies with the best of them. But at a shorter course like this, only 2 par 5, I think driving accuracy matters. I'm just not behind that. I like Kuchar. I like Grace. That's probably my third favorite play. The other guy that right now I like, and I can't figure out how much I like him, is Stenson. He's actually number one in the way I created my model. Yeah. The guy just hits so many greens, very accurate with his 3-wood, and it's not like he's going to need to hit 300-yard drives. His 3-wood, which is just so accurate, hitting it 280 yards out there is pretty much perfect for this course. So I'm a pretty big Stenson guy this week right now. And I think he's going to be somewhat contrarian as well. So that's where I'm looking at in this range. I think Kuchar is by far the number one value, but I think Stenson's interesting. Where's he rating for you right now, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going off of 0 course fit, so I'll probably have him rated a little bit lower. And, like, if you place accuracy to premium, like, yeah, it's definitely there. His long-term adjuster, even this recent adjusted round, just takes such a beating.
That Players Championship was so bad.
And Wells Fargo. Like, I mean, we kind of expected that one, but it was just very uncharacteristic of him. And he's clawing a little bit of that back in Europe, but, like, I don't know. I mean, it's an okay play. I think it's okay to good. If you think it's contrarian, again, that's your perception of ownership, then, like, yeah, I could absolutely see you ship it on Stenson.
So why is it contrarian? Because I agree with you, Pete. He looks great for this course in the models. He's popping really high for me as well. Why is he contrarian then?
Well, I mean, the last time everyone had him, the last time we watched him on TV was the Players Championship when he was a stone cold lock and like half the field had him. That was, in sharp contests, and he burned everybody. So in general, it's hard for people to go back. I think at that price range, I think a lot of people are going to be playing Kuchar and saving the 600. I think Grace will be more popular than him. So it's one of those things where his price is kind of awkward, and his recent performances that we've looked at. I mean, the Euro thing no one cares about, where he finished 4th, which was a terrible field anyways. His most recent results are just horrendous. And the players in Wells Fargo were just a total.
Okay. And Pete, you had mentioned this in our in our Evergreen pod that we had talked about Millie Maker strategy, that potentially guys might be really stars and scrubs heavy in their lineup approach, and it could lead to lower ownership and maybe some value in this like 9K to 10K range with guys, Bubba, Phil, Stenson, and even up to Willett, who obviously won the Masters a couple months ago in Matsuyama. Do you still think it's going to be lower ownership for these guys and maybe some sneaky value here?
It's interesting. One guy I respect said he thought Will would be one of the highest owned players. We didn't even talk about him. I think he's a fine play too, a pretty good play actually. I think there's some value in the Euros overall. But yeah, I mean it's tough. Like if you want to go that direction, you're going to be making a different lineup than most. I think a lot of people are going to start their teams with Day, Spieth, or Rory because the pricing's soft, and it's much harder to fit these guys with a kind of a traditional roster construction. So I think out of the guys you just named, Matsuyama and Will will be pretty popular relative to the rest of the guys. But yeah, I think Mickelson, Stenson, I think Grace will be a little bit owned, but I think those two in particular. And I guess Mickelson always has some, but I just have a feeling Stenson's going to be pretty low owned because of what we just talked about.
Okay. All right. Well, let's jump into our top tier. I definitely want to give these guys time. Like you said, we have the big three. It's always great to have all of these guys in the same tournament, big three being Dave, McIlroy, Spieth, but we also have, Dustin Johnson playing well recently. Ricky Fowler, sort of a divisive guy, Justin Rose, and Adam Scott will round out this tier at 10K above. So Pete, out of those, I guess, top three, really just the whole tier, I mean, do you have strong opinions on which guy you like the best?
I mean, I like Jason Day the best by far. Maybe I'm a little biased. So let's do a podcast where he was great. Just buying into the Jason Day thing. There's also everyone's talking about how he's a little under the weather. Now he had the flu or whatever before the Masters. Now that could hurt him. I love that. I hope that drives his ownership a little bit down. I just think he's by far, not by far, but a good amount better than everyone else in the field now. I think Jason Day is clearly the number one golfer in the world. I think everything's going to set up pretty well for him. One thing that I think will help on these greens, even more so for him than other guys, is hitting the ball extremely high. These greens are really slippery, and there's going to be a lot of spots where your ball can just run away from you. The nice thing for him is he kind of just hits these super high shots, even with irons from 180, 200 yards out. That I think that he, from just a lot of these subjective things that I've been reading and just I don't know. I think a lot of the really sharp guys and the people who really follow the tour think this is a really good spot for Day. So I like him the most out of all the top guys. I think that there's merit to playing a lot of Dustin Johnson as well. You could argue Dustin Johnson might be having the second best year on tour so far. So I think those are the two guys I like the most. I'm interested to see what people tout the rest of the week, because I hope there might be an opportunity maybe to get on Spieth in a higher stakes tournament. Because I think he might be lower owned relative to McIlroy and Day. But I'm definitely curious to hear what Colin has to say. Because I've heard other people say I'm taking a ton of Rory just because he's the birdie master. But I'm definitely on Day the most.
So I can't see a whole lot of daylight between just like average outcomes between McIlroy and Jason Day. And it kind of makes sense when you just look at the results. So like Jason Day is like last five or whatever. There's a 23 and a 27 in there, like with a couple wins. But McIlroy just like hasn't fallen out of the top 15 in the last how many that he's played, since match play. He's always finishing the top 15. There's a year. I mean, one of them is the Irish Open, yes, but it's just the top finishes are at least enough to kind of compete with Jason Day's scorched earth, when he's on. So it's almost like a consistency versus upside type of thing. I would believe all those subjective things though, if you want to count that as a tiebreaker, but I could equally see Rory as kind of being up there just from a numbers perspective. I think Jordan Spieth is pretty much where we left him last time. He's not Dustin Johnson is kind of renting his spot in the big three right now. I think it's kind of a big 2 and a 2.5 with Dustin Johnson right now. And Spieth is just not on DJ's level right now. So that's just kind of, again, the average outcomes. That's kind of we keep saying it's a great reason to play Spieth because because no one will play him, but everybody seems to keep playing him no matter what. So I don't know what to think of his ownership anymore. I outside of that, like if I had to pick just a pure contrarian, like one of like the best of the remaining ones, Adam Scott seems to be still flying under the radar. I mean, he's rarely this low. What has he done to justify this low of a price? There's a really bad finish at Dina DeLuca, but and like there's just he hasn't shown nearly this. Like what was that stretch in like February, March?
That Florida swing, he was just crushing.
Yeah,
I like Scott too. I think there's a great angle. Like if you're going to take the angle, hey, putting's less important. That's a great reason to love Scott. And same with the guy we didn't mention earlier, like Webb Simpson. I think there's a reason. I think that a good angle, if you want to take it, potentially, is just to take guys that aren't great at putting.
Yeah, I think that's a decent one. And on top of which he has the distance to match it if I really want to commit to this singing in the rain thing that I'm doing. So, yeah.
Okay, so we talked about line movement, and a guy that I just want to talk about this line movement because it's pretty drastic. Since Open and even since last week, the guy that's had the biggest drop by far is Jordan. And it seems that people are just down on him in general. And his implied odds at Open, he was the top guy at 12.5% to win the tournament. As of last week, he was 11.8, which was second behind Day and McIlroy, who were tied. Now he's down at 9.1, so a pretty big drop. I mean, drop of 3.4%, which is the biggest by far of any golfer. Why are people so down on him, and does that line movement bother you a lot, Pete?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me a lot yet. I think there's a speculation on why the line moved, but at least the narrative that I would take if I would, let's say, I don't like Spieth as much as these guys, Day and McIlroy, which I don't, is, if we're going to say putting's not important or as important, I mean, Spieth really makes a huge leap on the field on those 20-foot plus, especially that 20 to 30-foot range of putts. He makes so many more of those than everyone else. And from what I can tell and from what everyone's saying, it's just going to be really, really hard to make those. And a lot of it just is going to come down to get on the green and two-putt. And that's not really, Spieth's forte. I mean, his forte is making a lot of one-putts and just dropping bombs. And I just think that that's going to be much harder to do here. I think that he's just not nearly the caliber of Day and McIlroy right now in terms of his ball striking and everything else. I don't think he has the talent physically either that those guys do. I mean, those guys can hit the ball a mile and they can hit it high. So, I think that those are the reasons to be bearish on Spieth. And I still think he's a fantastic option. He has shown through, at a very young age that he's very good at peaking for these majors. He's figured out a routine to peak at the right time. So for that reason, I think I'll still have shares of him. But, yeah, I think that's the narrative is that, hey, if putting's less important and it's going to be harder to make a ton of putts, that definitely hurts Spieth more than it hurts other guys.
Speaking of peaking, I heard a debate earlier. It's just sort of more of a fun question than anything. Of all these golfers, if they were playing at their absolute peak, who is the best golfer?
Jason Day.
Yeah, Jason Day.
So not even a question.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Rory gets on these things where he makes like an insane amount. Like he'll make like 8 birdies in 9 holes or something like that. So Rory's peak is incredible too. But just for a whole tournament, I mean, it's very clear that when Day was playing incredible at the end of last year, I mean, he was lapping the field, Tiger-esque in some regards. Not quite peak Tiger, but definitely dominating the field. So
who's the guy to fade of this group? And especially, we can even lap this into some Millie Maker strategy because that's obviously the biggest tournament. Everyone is researching for that. I mean, yeah, who do you fade? Who is contrarian? It seems like Spieth might be a good option, but maybe like Colin, you said, maybe the field doesn't necessarily read into that, and they're still going to be owned. I don't know.
Yeah, I expect Spieth has the worst value of the tier here, and if you think that his ownership is inelastic to how he's performing at a millionaire maker because people are going off of name recognition or who won it the year before, like I could still construct an intelligent fade of like, I know we seem to say it every week, but like, no, it still works this week. Fade Spieth.
Yeah, I think that's the guy to fade. And again, I won't I might have him, especially in some higher buy-in stuff in some big spots, just because I think his ownership is going to be lower. But for the millionaire maker, for me, easy fade on Spieth, just because I think he's not I want Rory and Day shares. I want a lot of Rory and Day shares, especially Day, which I know he'll probably be the most popular. But I'm going to fade Spieth. He was the previous winner too, so I just expect the ownerships for those 3 guys to be pretty similar, to be honest. times.
Okay. We'll end it there. We definitely want to leave some questions. I do have some good ones piled up here for our live show on Wednesday, so I'll leave those. We'll hit on any more line movement because, if you guys say that the line movement is important from Tuesday to Wednesday, we're doing our show on Wednesday night, so that'll be really cool and interesting to go over the line movement together on that show. We can touch on these guys and maybe more on ownership and where we think the field is going to be then. But we'll end it from there. I mean, any last thoughts on these guys or the field, or you guys want to save it for Wednesday?
Yeah, save it for Wednesday. See how the line movement goes. See what we learn over the course of the week.
And weather too.
And weather. Well, I'll have a much more. I know it's going to rain, but I haven't done detailed analysis of it. And I think it's always smart for you guys listening early on Tuesday. I think you can start to look at it, but really with this week, if you're going to grind it out and really try to maximize the edge, I think you want to really wait until Wednesday to have a good feel for the weather.
Okay, well, we will end it there. Everyone, thank you for listening. As a reminder, we have a lot of content on the site. We have a bunch of articles and podcasts already up. We will have the live show at 9:30 Wednesday. Pete is going to go over his model. It's going to be out tomorrow, a lot of stuff. So check that on the site. And please join us 9:30 Eastern Time Wednesday for the live show. We'll talk to you guys then.